Hello, I'm Matthew Lamotte, three-time Magic champion living in Cambridge, and today we're talking about the biggest lessons I've learned from these three Magic legends. Let's get to it. First up, we have Paul Daniels. Now, Paul Daniels was a massive star over here in the UK. He had the longest running TV show spanning over 15 years in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. And when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I saw a magician on television, which initially sparked my interest. And then I asked my parents to get a magic set, my older brother's magic set from the loft, and it happened to be a Paul Daniels magic set. And that was my initial kind of start into magic. So thank you, Paul Daniels, for giving us that opportunity to have that initial contact with magic. So what did I learn from this magic legend? Well, in 2006, I was attending the World Championships of Magic, which is called FISM. They were being held in Stockholm in Sweden. There's lots of things happening. So there are people selling tricks, there's the competition, of course. There are people doing lectures, workshops, people sessioning, people meeting up, all sorts of things happening. Paul Daniels was there and he was doing a lecture/masterclass, and I can still picture this through my eyes. I would have been 15, 16 at the time. My first time travelling on my own back, actually. I flew out with my brother and then I flew back, and I actually got up late and ended up, the hotel ended up charging us like a late checkout fee or something. I was terrible when I was a teenager, so I enjoyed sleep too much. Anyway, lots of things are happening, and Paul Daniels is holding a lecture/masterclass. And I can still picture it through my eyes. I've got a notepad somewhere from this lecture, but he was describing how he broke down his magic and how he looked like sort of a lens that he looked through when he was breaking down either a piece or an act or an entire show. Because he had a long-running magic show on television, 15 years. He had to go through an awful lot of material. And one of the biggest takeaways from that was looking at magic in terms of scenes. And what I mean by that is, or what he meant by that, should I say, was so the magician, as one scene, the magician could be stood on the stage on their own, performing a piece of magic to the audience. That's one scene. And then he could invite an audience member up to join him on stage. And then that changed the dynamic of what the audience are watching. So now it's a communication between the magician and the person on stage. And then you invite somebody else up, now you've got two people on stage, it changes the dynamic again. And then you can have something where you're doing something to the entire audience. Maybe it's the whole audience gets involved. Maybe the magician goes into the audience, that changes the scene again. So it's looking through this lens of scenes and how many scenes you can integrate into a piece, an act or a show to give it colour and give it more vibrance and make the audience feel as if they've seen an awful lot more than if it were just a magician on stage telling people to come up and join him or her over and over again. So yeah, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this, because now I look at magic and look at my own magic through this lens of, okay, how can I change this up and make it look more interesting to either an audience, whether that's 3 people or whether that's, a theatre full of hundreds of people. I don't get that opportunity often, but it's something that I definitely think about, and there's a huge takeaway of looking through this lens of scenes. So yeah, thank you, Paul Daniels. Love it. Next up is David Blaine. Now, he first appeared over here on UK television in 1998. I believe I would have been about 8 or 9 years old. And his television show, David Blaine Street Magic, completely changed the landscape of magic and magicians forever. He turned the camera onto the audience, focused on their reaction. He stripped everything down away from magic, down to the bare bones. Even the way he dressed, the way he spoke, his mannerisms, his complete persona was just completely stripped back. It's just him letting the magic speak for itself. And that changed magic forever. That inspired a completely new generation of magicians, including myself. And at the time, I just wanted to be David Blaine. I wanted to be this guy. He was just so cool. I wore sneakers that were just like his. I wore a black t-shirt. I tried to make myself look cool as a kid. There's probably photos that I could throw up on the screen now. Look how cool I am. But I just wanted to be this guy. He was this guy that would walk up to people, do amazing things, and then just walk away again. He wasn't in fancy suits. He was just wearing shirts, sneakers. So what is my biggest takeaway from David Blaine? It's definitely that less is more. What David did was he took everything away from magic, even down to, he didn't wear fancy suits, he didn't have silly props, he didn't have showgirls, nothing. He didn't even say much, he didn't do much. He just let the magic speak for itself and allowed the audience to react to that or do whatever they were going to do with that. And I think by doing less, the audience feel obliged to fill in the chasm between the performer and themselves. Generally speaking, prior to David watching magic, it was about the magician filling in the space so the audience would love the magician, and that they're sort of looking for praise. And that was completely flipped on its head, because I think what David Blaine did was he performed something as a gift for the audience. That's definitely what my takeaway is from that. Less is more, and he gave me permission to experiment with that character and that persona. Going through my teens and early 20s, I was having a bit of a crisis of character, and I did some magic in some nightclubs for a while. I kind of took on that persona and experimented an awful lot with it, and I understand now what impact that has by just allowing the audience to fill in that gap and do whatever they're going to do. There's a magnetism to that which is really powerful, and by not doing much and just making small movements, and you can really control the focus of an audience by not saying much and by not doing much, because they're in a state of uncertainty, and you're only giving them so much to play with that they have to focus on that small amount. Rather than giving them lots to play with, they don't know where to focus. You actually have more direction and you're able to manage your audience better. So less is more is definitely the biggest takeaway. Thank you, David Blaine. Next is Derren Brown. Now I need to add a little bit of context to this. So there is a concept in magic and in drama called the willing suspension of disbelief. And essentially what that means is it's the moment where we allow ourselves to go along with the story. We become emotionally invested in the narrative, and we react as if the characters are real, and as if what's happening is happening now, even though we know it's only a story. So if you've ever watched a movie or a piece of theatre and you've become emotionally invested in that piece, you've either cried or you've been really scared if it's a scary movie, then those emotions indicate that you have willingly suspended your disbelief, because you are reacting as if those events are happening in the moment. So in magic, this is a really important concept to understand, because we can't actually make things float and we can't actually read people's minds. It's up to us to give our audiences enough of a narrative in order for them to suspend their own disbelief and go along with what we're saying in order for that magic to have the biggest impact. And this is something that Derren is just a complete master at. Even myself as a magician for 27 years now, when I watch Derren perform, he still has the ability to suspend my disbelief. And my magician brain switches off, and I'm just enjoying the performance, and I'm being pulled into whatever the narrative he's delivering. It's not just understanding the suspension of disbelief, it's also delivering those words with meaning and creating routines which have enough of a process to give the audience enough to play with in order for them to then go, okay, tell you what, I'm just going to fall into this, I'm going to fall into the groove that's being carved for me and just suspend my disbelief and enjoy this for what it is. And Derren is an absolute master at this. He's the showman of our generation, second to none, hands down. So that's my biggest takeaway, is to think about my narrative, my process, and getting my audience to care. That's the biggest takeaway. So thank you, Derren Brown. He's also a really nice guy. If you like this video, you'll absolutely love this one about my 5 golden tips for magicians. In a bit. I was in Stockholm in Stockholm, Sweden. It was being held in Stockholm in Sweden.